What happens when one of Hollywood's most legendary and unpredictable stars comes face-to-face with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? What unfolded wasn't just another celebrity interview. It became a tense clash that left everyone watching in complete disbelief. Stay with us, because once this story begins, every moment raises the stakes, and the ending is something few people could have predicted. Even before the cameras started rolling, there was a noticeable tension inside the View studio. The audience could sense that something unusual was in the air. Jack Nicholson, the iconic actor celebrated for decades of unforgettable performances and his larger-than-life personality, had arrived to promote his newest film. On the surface, it looked like a routine stop on a press tour, but beneath the smiles and bright studio lights, another story was quietly unfolding. And that leads to one question nobody dared ask aloud. Was this appearance really about the movie, or was something else waiting around the corner? At the famous panel table, Joy Behar reviewed her notes with a confident expression. She had reportedly been looking forward to this interview for weeks. Sitting across from one of Hollywood's greatest legends should have been a memorable career moment. Yet something about her demeanor suggested a different agenda. Her posture was tense, her focus unwavering. It looked less like preparation for an interview, and more like preparation for a confrontation. Then the moment finally arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Jack Nicholson. Whoopi Goldberg announced as applause filled the studio. Nicholson walked confidently onto the set with the unmistakable charisma that had made him one of cinema's most recognizable figures. Wearing a sharp black suit, with his signature sunglasses resting casually above his forehead, he carried himself with effortless confidence. As he settled into his chair, the atmosphere shifted. The excitement remained, but it was now mixed with uncertainty. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. But what happened next would transform an ordinary interview into a conversation no one in the room would forget. "Jack, thank you so much for joining us," Whoopi said with a welcoming smile. "It's wonderful to have you here." "The pleasure's mine," Nicholson replied in his unmistakable gravelly voice. "Although I have to admit, this panel is a little intimidating." The audience laughed, and for a brief moment the mood relaxed. Sarah Haynes and Alyssa Farah Griffin smiled warmly, clearly excited to be sitting across from such a legendary actor. Joy Behar, however, remained serious. Her attention never drifted from Nicholson. She watched him carefully, almost as though she had been waiting for the perfect opening. Then she leaned forward. "Jack," she began, her voice measured but firm, "we'll talk about your new movie shortly, but first, I think our viewers deserve to hear about some of your past remarks concerning women in Hollywood." Instantly, the mood inside the studio changed. Nicholson's smile softened. He remained composed, but the shift in expression was impossible to miss. "Well, Joy," he answered calmly, "context is important. Which comments are you referring to?" Joy responded without hesitation. "I think you already know." She continued by suggesting that his attitude toward female co-stars over the years had raised concerns. A wave of discomfort spread across the audience. Sensing the growing tension, Whoopi gently stepped in. "Joy, perhaps we should spend some time discussing Jack's latest project." But Joy wasn't ready to change direction. "No," she replied firmly. "This matters. He's spent more than 5 decades in Hollywood, and there have been countless stories about his behavior on film sets, stories that wouldn't be viewed the same way today." The room became noticeably quieter. Nicholson kept his composure, though his expression grew more serious. "Stories?" he replied, "or rumors, because those are two very different things. And I believe responsible journalism should recognize that distinction." That answer immediately changed the tone once again. Joy looked directly at him. Are you questioning my credibility as a journalist? Nicholson answered without raising his voice. I'm questioning your intentions. I came here expecting to discuss my work. Instead, it feels like I'm defending myself in a courtroom. The tension was now impossible to ignore. Sarah Haynes glanced anxiously between the two. Alyssa Farah Griffin remained silent, appearing uncertain whether stepping in would help, or only make things worse. The audience sat motionless. No one wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. Yet the biggest exchange was still ahead. My intentions are perfectly clear, Joy replied. I'm asking questions that hold powerful people accountable. Someone has to. Nicholson leaned back in his chair, his calm confidence giving way to the unmistakable intensity that had defined so many of his legendary performances. Accountable according to whose standards? He asked. Yours? Since when did you become Hollywood's moral authority? The audience fell completely silent. Joy answered immediately. Since I stopped allowing influential men to hide behind charm, reputation, and celebrity. Not a single sound could be heard in the studio. The cameras continued recording every second. Nicholson's expression hardened. Men like me, he repeated slowly. You don't know me. You're building conclusions from tabloids, rumors, and secondhand stories, and presenting them as journalism. Joy's face flushed as she responded without hesitation. I call it asking the questions that others are afraid to ask. Hard questions? Nicholson repeated with a brief laugh that carried no amusement. You haven't asked me a single question about my work, my creative process, or the film I came here to discuss. Every question has been aimed at tearing down my character. The atmosphere instantly grew even heavier. It felt as though the entire studio was holding its breath. Whoopi tried once more to steer the conversation back on course. All right, let's all slow down for a second. But Joy interrupted before she could finish. No, I'm not done yet. Her voice echoed through the room with unmistakable determination. You've enjoyed a free pass in this industry for decades. Your reputation for being difficult, your alleged treatment of women, your arrogance. People have been talking about it for years. Nicholson's expression sharpened immediately. Talking, he replied. Where is the evidence? Show me one credible source. One verified incident. One documented complaint from someone willing to put their name behind these accusations. The audience shifted uneasily. Joy didn't hesitate. I don't have to prove anything to you. Sometimes patterns speak louder than paperwork. Nicholson leaned forward. Patterns? Or rumors? His voice grew firmer. So now people are judged by whispers instead of facts. Whatever happened to the idea that accusations should be supported before they're accepted? Whatever happened to responsible journalism? The panel fell silent. Sarah Haynes exchanged an anxious glance with Alyssa Farah Griffin. It was becoming painfully obvious that this discussion had moved far beyond an uncomfortable interview. And somehow, the tension continued to rise. Joy folded her arms. Don't lecture me about journalistic standards, she replied, especially coming from someone whose public image has raised questions for years. That remark changed everything. Until that moment, Nicholson had remained remarkably composed. Now that composure appeared to crack. He pushed back his chair and stood. The chair scraped loudly across the studio floor, startling the audience. A ripple of gasps swept through the room. The easygoing Hollywood legend who had walked onto the set minutes earlier had disappeared, replaced by visible frustration. You've crossed a line, Nicholson said, his voice resonating across the studio. You're attacking my reputation on national television without presenting a single verified fact. Even Joy appeared momentarily surprised, though she quickly regained her composure. "Sit down, Jack," she answered firmly. "Your reaction is proving exactly what I've been talking about." Nicholson shook his head slowly. "My reaction?" He let out another short, frustrated laugh. "No, what's happening here is an attack disguised as an interview." The audience erupted into hushed conversations. Along the edges of the set, staff members watched closely. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged urgent signals as they debated whether the segment should continue. Sarah and Alyssa remained silent, their expressions reflecting the shock shared by much of the audience. But the confrontation was far from over. Joy took another verbal swing. "At least I'm not someone trying to relive past success while making life difficult for everyone around me." Before anyone could respond, Nicholson struck the tabletop with an open hand. The sound echoed through the studio as coffee cups rattled against the surface. "Past success?" he answered sharply. "I've devoted my life to this profession, and I'm proud of every chapter of it. But what's happening here has nothing to do with acting." He looked directly across the table. "The only intimidation taking place is inviting someone here under one pretense and confronting them with allegations that haven't been substantiated." Joy immediately pushed back. "They're not baseless allegations. People have discussed your behavior for years. Ask around." Nicholson answered without hesitation. "Or ask the tabloids that keep those stories alive." Then he leaned slightly forward. "And maybe ask yourself something." His voice lowered, but somehow became even more powerful. When your career revolves around examining everyone else's life, it becomes easy to lose sight of what fairness and integrity actually require. The words landed with unmistakable force. Joy's expression changed instantly. For a brief moment, she seemed caught off guard before responding. "How dare you question my integrity?" she replied. "I've spent years building my career. I earned my place at this table." Nicholson answered just as quickly. "You earned it by challenging people. That's fair. But there's a difference between asking difficult questions and putting someone on trial before presenting evidence." Silence swept across the studio once again. Finally, Whoopi raised her voice with unmistakable authority. "That's enough." She looked from one side of the table to the other. "We need to stop this before it goes any further." For a split second, it seemed as though the confrontation might finally come to an end. But judging by the expressions around the table, everyone knew the situation had already gone far beyond an ordinary television interview. "Don't tell me to calm down," Joy shot back, refusing to back away. For decades, people have looked the other way. If no one is willing to ask these questions, then who will? "My behavior?" Nicholson responded, his voice echoing across the studio. In that instant, everyone in the audience, and everyone watching from home, could sense the confrontation had reached a critical point. There was no longer any doubt. This interview had transformed into something much bigger. "What behavior?" Nicholson demanded. "Show me one witness, one official report, one lawsuit, one verified complaint. Just one piece of concrete evidence." The room fell completely silent. "You can't," he continued, "because you're asking me to answer accusations built on speculation instead of facts." Joy refused to retreat. "I don't need your approval," she replied forcefully. "I've spoken to people. I've heard stories over the years. When enough voices tell the same story, you pay attention." Nicholson stared back in disbelief. So rumors are enough now? He slowly spread his hands. That's become the standard? His voice remained firm. That isn't journalism. Journalism demands evidence, accountability, and fairness. Without those, all you have is speculation amplified by a television audience. Not a single person in the studio moved. The audience watched in stunned silence, fully aware they were witnessing a television moment that would likely dominate conversations long after the cameras stopped rolling. Every camera remained fixed on the exchange. No one wanted to miss what happened next. Joy answered immediately. You're calling me unfair while you're standing here shouting at everyone. She pointed toward him. You're demonstrating exactly why people have raised concerns. Nicholson answered just as quickly. No, he said. I'm demonstrating what any person would do when their reputation is publicly challenged without proof. His tone remained intense but controlled. Defending yourself isn't the same as admitting guilt. The tension inside the studio became almost impossible to ignore. Joy shook her head. A calm person would simply answer the questions. Nicholson interrupted. These aren't questions. They're conclusions disguised as questions. He looked directly at her. You decided the verdict before I ever walked onto this set. For several long seconds, no one else spoke. Finally, Sarah Haynes quietly broke the silence. Maybe this would be a good moment to take a commercial break. Before anyone else could respond, Joy answered. No. Her eyes never left Nicholson. We're finishing this conversation. She spoke with complete certainty. Your reaction tells me everything I need to know. The room grew even quieter. Then Nicholson leaned forward. Not aggressively, but deliberately. His voice became almost calm. You want to know who I am? He paused. I'm someone who devoted a lifetime to my profession. Someone who has worked alongside hundreds of talented people. And I'm also someone who doesn't appreciate being invited here under one expectation only to discover the interview has become a public cross-examination. Joy immediately fired back. I've spent decades interviewing presidents, world leaders, and some of the biggest names in entertainment. Nicholson answered before she could continue. An experience should make interviews more thorough, not more speculative. He continued steadily. A fair interviewer asks specific questions supported by specific facts and gives the guest an opportunity to respond. That's how credibility is built. Joy shook her head. I gave you every opportunity. Nicholson responded with a short, incredulous laugh. When someone is accused on national television without evidence, defending themselves isn't avoidance. He looked across the table. It's exactly what anyone would do. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Producers exchanged urgent signals. Staff members stood ready in case the situation escalated further. The remaining hosts appeared visibly uncomfortable, caught between two determined voices that showed no sign of backing down. But then Joy delivered what seemed to be her strongest criticism yet. You know what, Jack? She said, her tone turning noticeably colder. You represent a different era, one where powerful people could avoid difficult questions because of their influence. The studio became absolutely silent. Every eye turned toward Nicholson. His expression changed. For several long seconds, he said nothing. The pause itself created almost as much suspense as the argument. Then, in a voice far quieter than before, he finally responded. A different era? He nodded slowly. If we're going to talk about the past, then let's also talk about what happens when outrage replaces careful investigation, and when public confrontation becomes more important than finding the truth. The calmness in his voice somehow carried even greater weight than the shouting that had come before. And at that moment, everyone in the studio realized the confrontation had entered an entirely new phase. So let's talk about something else, Nicholson continued, his voice calm but unwavering. Let's talk about what happens when people spend more time tearing others down than building something meaningful themselves. The studio seemed to fall into complete silence. Every face in the audience remained fixed on the two figures at the table. Joy drew a slow breath before answering. "At least I'm honest about who I am," she replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm not pretending to be something I'm not while ignoring questions that deserve answers." Nicholson gave a brief, dry laugh. "Pretending?" he said. "I've never claimed to be perfect. I've spent my life doing one thing, acting. My work has always spoken for itself." The tension was now impossible to escape. Whoopi made one final attempt to regain control. "All right, this has gone far enough. We need to move on." Before she could finish, Nicholson answered. "No, Whoopi." His attention never left Joy. She wanted this conversation. Let's see it through. The room became eerily quiet. Not even the audience reacted. Everyone was waiting. "What's truly concerning," Nicholson continued, "is using a national platform to repeat allegations that haven't been substantiated." He spoke slowly, emphasizing every word. "What's concerning is placing someone's reputation on trial without evidence." Joy immediately rose from her chair, matching his stance. "And what's concerning," she answered, "is an industry where powerful figures have often avoided difficult scrutiny." Nicholson responded without hesitation. "If there are real accusations, then present them." His voice echoed across the studio. "Names, dates, verified incidents, real evidence." He paused. "Otherwise, all we're discussing are assumptions." Joy refused to back down. "I don't owe you anything." Her voice rose. "The questions exist because people have been asking them for years." The audience reacted with another wave of hushed murmurs. Around the set, crew members exchanged uncertain glances. No one seemed sure whether the discussion could still be brought back under control. Nicholson spread his hands. "People?" He shook his head. "Who exactly?" His tone remained steady. "I can point to directors I've worked with, actors I've collaborated alongside, crew members who know me personally." He looked directly across the table. "I'm talking about people willing to stand behind what they say." Joy answered immediately. "They're protecting someone with influence." Nicholson sighed before responding. "Or perhaps..." He paused deliberately. "Perhaps they're simply telling the truth, and you've already decided not to believe it." The words landed heavily. For a moment, no one interrupted. Then Joy answered again, her frustration unmistakable. "Don't lecture me about truth." Nicholson remained composed. "My career was built on discipline, preparation, and decades of work." He continued without raising his voice. "Those are the standards I've tried to live by." The exchange had become increasingly personal. Every sentence carried more weight than the last. Joy's expression hardened. "How dare you question my professionalism?" She pointed toward the panel. "I've spent years earning my place here." Nicholson answered almost immediately. and I've spent decades earning mine. His tone stayed remarkably controlled. The difference is that I came here expecting a conversation about my work, not a verdict before the first question. Before either of them could continue, Whoopi struck the table with her hand. That's enough. Her voice rang across the studio. We're ending this now. But everyone in the room knew the damage had already been done. The confrontation had gone far beyond what anyone expected when the interview began. Joy turned back toward Nicholson one final time. What's enough, she said, is powerful people believing they're beyond criticism. Nicholson answered immediately. Beyond criticism? He shook his head. You challenged me before I had the chance to discuss a single thing I came here for. His expression remained firm. You transformed an interview into a courtroom, and now you're acting surprised that I defended myself. For several long seconds, neither side moved. The audience sat frozen. The other hosts remained speechless. Every camera continued recording. The moment had become much larger than either person at the table. Joy spoke again. I'm trying to expose what I believe is the truth. Nicholson slowly leaned forward for one final response. The truth, he said quietly, is that real accountability depends on evidence, not assumptions. He continued. If difficult questions are going to be asked, they deserve equally careful standards. His voice never rose. And today, I believe those standards were forgotten. Silence swept across the studio. Joy looked ready to answer, but the words didn't come immediately. For the first time since the confrontation began, the room was completely still. No applause. No interruptions. Only silence, leaving everyone watching to decide for themselves what they had just witnessed. The silence that followed was almost overwhelming. Without saying another word, Nicholson calmly adjusted his jacket and looked directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in a steady voice, if this is what passes for journalism today, then we should all expect better. Conversations should be built on facts, not speculation. Questions should seek answers, not predetermined conclusions. He then turned back toward Joy. His expression remained composed. You had an opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about a lifetime of work and experience, he said. Instead, this became something entirely different. He paused briefly. That decision reflects the interview, not the person being interviewed. With that, Nicholson quietly removed his microphone, placed it carefully on the table, and walked away from the set without another glance behind him. His footsteps echoed through the silent studio as he disappeared backstage. No one spoke. Joy slowly lowered herself back into her chair. The other hosts exchanged uncertain looks, each seemingly searching for the right words, but none came. The audience remained completely still, trying to absorb everything they had just witnessed. Finally, Whoopi broke the silence. We'll be right back after this commercial break. The cameras faded to black. But the conversation was only beginning. Within minutes, viewers everywhere were debating what had unfolded. What had started as a routine celebrity interview had evolved into one of the most talked-about television moments of the day. Supporters of one side argued that public figures should always face difficult questions. Others believed the interview had crossed the line between accountability and confrontation. Whatever viewers believed, one thing was undeniable. The exchange sparked a much broader discussion about journalism, evidence, fairness, and the responsibility that comes with conducting high-profile interviews. And that debate quickly spread far beyond the studio walls. As clips circulated online, countless opinions emerged. Some praised the persistence of challenging, powerful guests. Others questioned whether the interview had become too personal and lost sight of its original purpose. By the end of the day, the confrontation had become bigger than either person involved. It had become a conversation about where the line should be drawn between asking difficult questions and ensuring those questions are supported by verifiable facts. One thing was certain. Nobody who watched the exchange would forget it anytime soon. Now the discussion turns to you. Do you believe the interview remained within the bounds of tough journalism, or do you think it crossed into an unnecessary confrontation? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the biggest moments making headlines. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.